Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Rosenbluth. I'm a community organizer at Rogue Climate. Rogue Climate is a nonprofit public interest group that works to empower Southern Oregon communities most impacted by climate change, including low-income, rural youth and communities of color, to win climate justice by organizing for clean energy, sustainable jobs, and a healthy environment. We focus on a couple major campaigns. One, which I'm going to talk to you all about today, is the campaign to stop the proposed Jordan Cove LNG export terminal and the Pacific Connector frac gas pipeline, which is proposed in Southern Oregon, which is where I'm based right now. I'm talking from Medford, Oregon today. We also move forward clean energy projects and energy efficiency programs because we understand that we have to be moving forward solutions as we're stopping projects that move us backwards for climate. So I'm going to start my PowerPoint now, and I'm just going to talk to you all about the campaign to stop Jordan Cove and the Pacific Connector pipeline and some of the human rights and environmental issues that we have seen through our research and the impacts on our communities. Great, so hopefully everyone can see that. So that is my name and my contact info if you need to know more. The Jordan Cove proposal is proposed by Pembina Pipeline Corporation, which is a Canadian fossil fuel corporation. They are proposing a 229-mile-long frac gas pipeline called the Pacific Connector Pipeline to transport frac gas from mostly Canada, but also probably from Colorado, Wyoming, and Utah, from Malin, Oregon, which is in Klamath County, to Coos Bay, Oregon, where it would be liquefied at LNG terminal. LNG stands for liquefied natural gas, shipped overseas. Shipped overseas to be used primarily in Asia. If built, this would be the first LNG export terminal on the West Coast and the third in the country. Right now, Cove Point and Sabine Pass are currently functioning LNG export terminals. So this proposal was originally proposed in 2005 as an import facility. In 2009, the company actually withdrew their application and resubmitted for an export terminal because of the fracking boom that was happening in North America. In 2016, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission actually denied the project twice as a result of massive opposition from local residents, the impacts to landowners and local communities, and a lack of contracts from companies willing to buy the gas. So this project was one of the, it was a really unprecedented denial from the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. I think it's the second that has ever happened out of hundreds of pipeline applications that they have let go through. So that was a pretty incredible win for our community, especially for people who are directly on the pipeline route, who have been dealing with this issue for over 13 years now. So when Trump was elected in 2017, the company decided that it would be a particularly good time to reapply. So it was only months after FERC denied this project that the company resubmitted their application for the project, and our communities are having to start this whole battle all over again. At the moment, from the last data that we've seen from FERC, only 30% of landowners have signed easements with the company, allowing them to use their property. So if this project was to go through, we would see a huge amount of eminent domain being used to build the pipeline. So the project consists of 4 parts. So first there is the fracking to extract the gas. And that would not be happening in Oregon. That would be in Canada and in Colorado. Then there's the Pacific Connector pipeline, which is the 229-mile-long pipeline that would terminate in Coos Bay at the proposed Jordan Cove LNG export terminal. where the gas would be supercooled into LNG, and then the gas would be shipped overseas in fracked gas tankers. So first, as you probably have heard in this tribunal this week, fracking is a process to extract gas where folks are drilling deep holes and shooting chemicals and water into the earth to fracture it, and then capturing the gas that escapes. Building the first LNG export terminal on the West Coast would increase the demand for fracking across the continent and result in an estimated 1,000 new fracking wells over the next 20 years. The Physicians for Social Responsibility released a great piece on the impacts, health impacts that fracking communities have seen. And some of these include the contamination of underground aquifers and surface waters, air emissions that include volatile organic compounds, which are extremely unhealthy for human health, and especially for workers who are close to the vicinity. They also note that methane leakage is a big accelerator of climate change, and that methane is 86 times more potent at capturing heat in the atmosphere than CO2 is in the first 20 years of its life cycle. So then we get to the pipeline. So as I've said earlier, the gas would be transported via this 229-mile long pipeline. The pipeline would be a 36-inch diameter and highly pressurized. This pipeline would start in Malin, Oregon, where it would connect to the existing Ruby pipeline or GTN pipeline. The Ruby pipeline, it comes from the Colorado area from the US, and then GTN would be where the gas would come down from British Columbia. The pipeline impacts traditional tribal territories, cultural resources, and burial grounds. The Karuk, Yurok, and Klamath tribes have all come out in strong opposition to the project. 3 other tribes have filed as interveners with FERC and have filed their concerns with the agency about the project. The pipeline also threatens about 400 rivers and streams in Oregon, including the Klamath, Rogue, Umpqua, Coquille, and Coos rivers. This also includes 12 public drinking water sources, including Medfords, which is the community that I'm in right now, and 6 miles of wetlands. As we know, construction has major impacts on water quality, fish habitat, cultural resources, and river-dependent industries like outdoor rec and fishing. Under the major rivers, Pembina is proposing to use a drilling technique called horizontal directional drilling. One major risk of HDD is a frack out, and this is where the drilling fluids, the drilling fluids that they use to push the pipeline underneath the river actually come up from the riverbed and poison the water downstream. And we've seen this in Ohio, where a similar frack gas pipeline is under construction. About 2 million gallons of drilling fluids have been spilled into wetlands because of the use of horizontal directional drilling that went wrong. Also in Pennsylvania, another frack out has contaminated drinking water, forcing nearby residents to use bottled water for both drinking and bathing. The pipeline would also include a 95-foot clear cut along the pipeline route. This would be one of the largest clear cuts in Oregon's history. This can lead to landslides and sedimentation of waterways. Pipeline testing also would require 90 million gallons of fresh water from drought-stricken southern Oregon. After the water is pumped through the pipeline and full of the construction contaminants, the company still has no proposed plan on what to do with that contaminated water. Frack gas pipelines are highly explosive. There will be above ground portions of the pipeline located in wildfire-prone areas of southern Oregon. Pipelines have lower safety regulations in rural communities, and many landowners will be responsible for monitoring the pipeline on their property. Hundreds of, like I said earlier, hundreds of private landowners would be impacted by the pipeline route, and many will be threatened with eminent domain if they do not settle for a small payment for permanent use of their land. So here is a map of the existing pipeline infrastructure in Oregon. The dotted line is the proposed Pacific Connector pipeline, and that orange dot is the proposed export facility in Coos Bay. The GTN pipeline, they don't show the full extension here, but this is the one that goes up to British Columbia. And then the Ruby pipeline, which passes over California and goes into Malin, Oregon, is the one that would be coming from Colorado. And then these are the companies to the left that are proposing this that we see infiltrating our communities. So in order to connect the existing fracked gas pipelines to the new proposed Pacific Connector pipeline, Pembina would expand a compressor station to pressurize the gas. The compressor stations are known to be extremely loud and polluting facilities, disrupting health and quality of life for nearby communities. They pollute carcinogenic air toxins like toluene, carbon monoxide, and formaldehyde. Earthworks has done a really great job in doing research on this, and I think that they talked early in the tribunal, so I'd recommend hopefully you all get to hear from them about the impacts of compressor stations. One major concern of ours on this compressor station is that it is a clear example of environmental racism. Pembina is proposing to expand this compressor station in Malin, Oregon. Malin is over 70% Latinx, while the rest of Klamath County is only about 13. So corporations like Pembina often subject communities of color to these hazardous projects, resulting in permanent health impacts for short-term corporate gain. So this is a clear example of the worst impacts of the extractive industry burdening communities of color. And then there's the export facility, and Jody McCaffrey, who will be on shortly, who lives in Coos Bay, will be going more deeply into this, but I will talk a little bit about it here. So Pembina wants to build an export facility to liquefy the fracked gas. They would cool it to negative 260 degrees Fahrenheit to turn that into LNG and then ship it to markets overseas. The export facility is proposed on the traditional territory of the Confederated Tribes of the Coos, Siuslaw, and Lower Umpqua. And the tribes have known cultural resources at this location and are monitoring and working their best to protect those. The terminal poses serious safety risks to communities in Coos County. When LNG is exposed to air, it evaporates extremely rapidly, producing an explosive gas vapor cloud, which can cause massive explosions if ignited. The terminal would be located in a tsunami zone and in an earthquake-prone region. I'm sure you have all heard about the Cascadia subduction zone. 16,000 Coos Bay residents would be in a hazardous blast zone because of this terminal if it was built. And we've seen in other places really dangerous events happening. In 2014, the Plymouth LNG facility in Washington exploded, injuring workers and forcing hundreds of residents to evacuate their homes. The terminal alone would become the largest source of climate pollution in the state of Oregon by 2020, when our last remaining coal plant is shut down for pollution concerns. And then tankers. So at the export facility, tankers would be loaded with LNG for shipping. These are the largest vessels in the world. They're about 950 feet long, which is 3 football fields, and 150 feet wide. This would constitute the largest dredging project in Oregon's recent history to fit these tankers in the bay. And the impacts of dredging would be on cultural resources, shellfish, and water quality in the bay, which would really impact the communities who rely on the bay for many, many things. Parts of the channel would also be closed during LNG shipments, impacting local shellfish industry and the outdoor recreation industry. Spills from LNG tankers are considered to be more dangerous than oil tankers. The US Department of Energy commissioned a report that found that if a tanker ran aground and suffered a leak, LNG could pour into the water and freeze, again, creating a large vapor cloud of gas, which could ignite if diluted with oxygen. So recently, Oil Change International released a greenhouse gas assessment of the Jordan Cove LNG export terminal and Pacific Connector pipeline. This is using, you can see here the reference case is using a low percentage of methane range leakage. So it could be anywhere from 36.8 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent to 52 million metric tons of CO2 equivalent per year as resulting from this project. The emissions of this project would completely undermine Oregon's actions to address climate change. This project, if built, the pollution would account for 20% of Oregon's allotted in-state pollution if we follow Governor Brown's commitments that she recently made to the Paris Climate Accord earlier this year. Considering the entire life cycle emissions, Jordan Cove would account for over 300% of the allowed pollution under that same commitment, while supplying no energy to the state of Oregon. And you can see in this chart here from that same report, the amount, the percentage of the emissions allotted for both the Paris Agreement, which is the, oops, sorry, I clicked it, which is the MOU 2, and then also under Oregon's goals for climate change, which were adopted in 2007. So we could see we could not reach either of those and supply our own energy if this project was created. We know climate change disproportionately impacts communities of color, indigenous communities, and low-income communities in Oregon and around the world. Additionally, the continued dependence on fossil fuels means a hotter, drier, and more fire-prone Oregon and more frequent severe storms like Hurricane Maria, the devastating impacts of which Puerto Rico is still suffering from. Fracked gas, the gas industry likes to say that we need to rely on fracked gas as a bridge fuel from coal and oil to renewables, but we know that this is not true. Another report from Oil Change International called Burning the Bridge Fuel Myth is really great in explaining how to reach the goals that we need to for a safe and livable climate, we need to transition immediately to renewable energy, and we can do that if we have the political will. So these are four of the points that they put out for why fracked gas is not a bridge fuel. So climate goals require that the power sector needs to be decarbonized by mid-century. So this means gas use must be phased out, not increased. New gas is actually holding back renewable energy. Wind and solar are now cheaper than coal and gas in many regions. So this means that new gas capacity is displacing new wind and solar rather than old coal projects. New gas locks in emissions for 40 plus years. Companies building multi-billion-dollar gas infrastructure today expect to operate their assets for around 40 years. And then there is too much gas already. The coal, oil, and gas that the world is currently producing under construction projects, if extracted and burned, would likely take the world far beyond safe climate limits. And we know that we can create more jobs by investing in renewable energy than we can by frack gas projects like this. There's actually 3 times more jobs created in renewable energy per dollar invested than in coal, oil, and gas. Exporting LNG also would raise domestic gas prices. Even Avista Senior Vice President Jason Thaxton said in 2014 that exporting LNG puts pressure on prices that wouldn't be good for consumers in the United States. Utility price increases disproportionately impact low-income ratepayers and can put more pressure on people who are already housing insecure. The company is promising benefits to our communities, but history of projects like this have shown that these promises are rarely kept and do not outweigh the impacts on our communities. The company is promising $30 million in tax revenue spread out between the 4 counties impacted by the project, with pipeline communities getting around $5 million a year. But currently in Coos County, Jordan Cove is currently seeking a 15-year tax abatement in attempts to pay far less than they would normally have to pay in property taxes. The company also says that they will create around 200 permanent jobs and somewhere between 1,000 and 3,000 temporary construction jobs. Many of these workers will come from outside of our communities, creating temporary work camps that have been associated with increased violence on women, particularly Indigenous women, crimes and drug usage, and higher rents and cost of living. Many communities in Southern Oregon are already facing housing crises. In Coos County and Jackson County, we are seeing that especially, and we are very concerned about what the influx of temporary workers will do to housing insecure folks in our communities. Another thing that is particularly concerning, the company is paying for an entire LNG division in the Coos County Sheriff's Department and will hire 9 new sheriffs this summer, years before construction is supposed to start, to protect the facility and their property. In Cove Point, Maryland, Dominion Energy had similar contracts with the police, and this essentially criminalized local opposition to the LNG export facility there. So this is a timeline that Jordan Cove proposed. It has already been pushed back and delayed. So what has happened so far, they have submitted their state and federal permits, but no comment periods have opened for that, and no permits have been approved at the moment. They are expecting FERC to approve their proposal in the late summer of 2018. We're still waiting for the draft environmental impact statement from FERC, and that should be coming out this summer, and then we will hear a decision from them shortly after that. Construction, they're hoping that construction will begin in 2019, but all of the agencies who we have talked to have also said that this is extremely unlikely to start that soon. And then they are expecting to have the pipeline and terminal in service by 2024. So there are some state permits that can actually stop this project, and that even if the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission approves this project under the Trump administration, the state of Oregon has a few permits that if this project does not comply with, could stop the project for good. So Jordan Cove has recently sent in their application for the Clean Water Act to the Oregon Department of Environmental Quality. That is still incomplete at the moment. That is one of the permits that, if denied, could stop this project for good. There's actually an example of that happening in Oregon. The Bradwood LNG export terminal, which was proposed on the Columbia River, was stopped in part due to Oregon denying this permit. So it'll be extremely important for our communities to be engaged in the public comment process for the DEQ Clean Water Act permitting process, which is likely to open up in the next 2 weeks. Jordan Cove also has to get a removal and fill permit from the Oregon Department of State Lands, and that application is still considered incomplete. And DSL just gave the company another extension to complete their application a couple months, or I think last month. There are some other ways that Oregon has the authority to stop the project, but I'm not going to go into them right now. We're seeing that we really need our elected officials to stand up for communities that are impacted by this project. So right now, what we are really asking our communities to do is to call Governor Brown and ask her to stand up against the project for and by directing state agencies to deny permits that protect Oregon's water quality and coastal zones. We also have climate pledges and things like that. So people are really excited again to stop this project for good. So that is my presentation, and hopefully that was useful and exciting for you all today, and I'm happy to take questions. I know that we're running behind schedule, so let me know.
Gil Beringer, I have a couple of questions and comments. Just a small point. You said that the company was paying for more police. And I
Yes.
think 9 was the figure, I think.
Mhm.
What percentage of the police force would that be? Do you have any idea?
I don't have an idea on that number, but that's a great question. It would be an entire division that would be paid for by the company to protect the export facility.
Yeah. Would protect it from what and whom?
Yeah, so that's a great question.
I think we know.
Yeah. um, yeah, that's a
Okay.
good question. And I wish I had more answers to that. Hopefully we'll be getting more information soon.
It's dressed up as protection of the facilities,
Mhm.
security, et cetera, the same, combat terrorism and so.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly.
Yeah, I just wanted to comment and say it was, your presentation was very useful, and it reinforces something that one of the presenters said yesterday, and that is that we're talking about fracking, but we're talking more than just the fracturing of the rocks,
Mhm.
the wells that are going, and dredging, for example, is a good example of the need for us to look at the whole landscape, if you will, plus the air, to notice that there are just so many costs upstream and downstream, pardon the pun.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, 2 other points or questions. You said the landowners are responsible for monitoring,
Mhm.
and in the rural areas, the safety standards are lower. On the first point, the monitoring, is that in some kind of, is that in the contract that they have to sign, and what are they required to do?
Yeah, so it's not, I'm not sure if it's directly in their contract, but because of such a long length of pipeline, the company won't be able to monitor the pipeline in the 229 miles of really, really rugged Oregon landscape. So if there is a leak, the landowners are responsible for reporting that to the company. This gas is not scented, so it would be really hard to know if there was a leak. And that's one of the big concerns that we have, especially in our very fire-prone Southern Oregon region, that landowners would not actually know if there was.
Well, as a lawyer, when people say responsible for, then I ask, does that mean there's a legal duty, or are you saying that the company can't do it? So if you want to protect your property, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I haven't seen a contract in a while, but I would, if you want me to get back to you on that, I could definitely do that.
Okay. And yeah, and the safety standards, I think a presenter yesterday said that they used different kind of pipes, thinner perhaps.
Yeah, they
Is
use
that an example? Yeah. Any other examples of?
Yeah. Not that I can think of off the top of my head. That's the biggest one that's our concern. And I think also the length of the stop valves are farther apart too in rural communities than they are in urban communities. But I don't have all of that at my hands right now.
Sorry, the length of.
Yeah, so I think the stop valves, so these are the valves that they turn to stop the gas, are at a further length apart in rural communities than they are in more populated areas.
So that makes the line more dangerous.
Yeah, because so for instance, if there was a fire or something, they would, I think, be about 18 miles apart or something like that you would have to get to be able to stop the pipeline, stop the gas.
Okay, thanks. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Allie.